Evening all, Brian S. Pratt here. So I am going to read chapter 22. For those who have been following me, I usually do this in the morning. This one I'm doing at night because I'm leaving early in the morning for Waxahachie and the Renaissance Festival there. So I'm going to get this out tonight so I won't fall behind and keep on a schedule. Because once you break with the schedule, it gets easier and easier to get break within them before you know it, you're just not doing it anymore. So I'm going to try to maintain this and can just keep it going chapter after chapter after chapter. And hopefully you'll follow along. So we're at chapter 22. Quick recap. Michael and James are trying to get over the Dragon's Mountains to Merchant's Pass. They just came up from trade meet. They found the pass closed because of war on the other side. The city of Saga has fallen. The Empire's forces are pushing north near the other inside of the pass, and it's just too dangerous, so they shut it down. So they have decided that they are going to try and find an alternate way. James uses his compass. Now they're in it. They went to this old keep, found a secret door. Now it starts with them having gone through the secret door, and now we'll find out what happens. All right, here we go. Chapter 22. The tunnel was quite narrow, just wide enough to accommodate them side by side and barely tall enough to pass without ducking. Once through the door, it swung closed again, shutting tight. The orb gave them sufficient light to see, illuminating the tunnel deeper into the mountain. James handed his things to Michael and then searched the area near the door, looking for the hidden mechanism that would allow them to reopen it from this side. After several minutes of fruitless searching, he gave up. "Let's hope we don't need to come back this way in a hurry," he said to Michael, taking his things back. Yeah. I'm going to change that to, instead of taking his things back, taking back his things. That just makes more sense. All right, here we go. Yeah, agreed Michael nervously. Let's hope that. With his packs properly situated, James headed down the tunnel. 10 feet or so from the door, they came across a bundle of torches. Michael removed his knife and cut the ties that held the bundle together. Taking several, he placed them in one of his bags. James looked at him questioningly. Michael just shrugged and said, "You never know." Nodding his approval, James turned and led them further into the mountain. Farther. I think that's led them farther into the mountain because that is distance farther. The tunnel continued for some time before it opened onto a subterranean cavern. The orb's light revealed many stalactites and stalagmites. The play of shadows gave the cavern an eerie feeling. From all around came the steady drip, drip, drip of water coming off the stalactites. "Wow," Michael said, awed by the extraordinary rock formations revealed by the orb's light. The light revealed further marvelous, breathtaking sights as they wended their way through the cavern. Many of the walls were quite brilliant with bright, contrasting colors. Michael stopped briefly to touch one. "Pretty impressive, isn't it?" James asked, coming up behind him. "I've never seen anything like it in my life. How did all this get to be here?" James indicated one of the stalactites hanging from the ceiling. "Water drips through cracks in the ceiling and runs down one of those stalactites." Michael looked at him confused. "Stalactites are what the ones from the ceiling are called, and stalagmites are the ones rising up from the floor," he explained. "Over a very long time, hundreds and thousands of years, the continual passage of water left minerals behind. Over time, they hardened to form the structures you see here." He could almost hear Mr. Perkins, his ninth grade teacher, in the back of his mind going over the chapter on caves and cave formations. "Amazing," Michael said as he rubbed one. "It's hard as rock." "It is rock," James explained. "Over time, the minerals come together and form the rock." "Hard to believe," Michael said in wonder. Wouldn't have if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes." "Come on, we need to get going." James hurried Michael along as they made their way through the cavern. Okay, I love caves. I've been to Cave of the Winds near Colorado Springs. I've been to Carlsbad Caverns in New Mexico. And I've been to the Shasta Caverns in Southern Oregon, Northern California. I can never remember where Shasta is. I think Shasta's on the California side. And it's just fascinating. If you've never been to one, man, you got to go. The pools, in pools and scurrying among the rock formations, they encountered many strange animals in this subterranean world, most pale in color. In one large pool, Michael noticed little dots of light moving below the surface. James, he hollered, come here, you got to see this. James knelt and looked into the water. Seeing the little dots moving around, he said, it's probably just small fish. Fish? Michael asked incredulously, with lights? Assuming tones similar to that of Mr. Perkins, James explained, when there is a total absence of light, fish and other animals will often produce their own. How? That I don't recall, he admitted. I just know that they do. Had it not been for Susie Hampton, who had sat at the desk next to him, he probably could have answered Michael's question. Yeah, having been a young man in high school, yeah, those cute girls, they can distract you. The cavern continued on for several hundred feet before they reached an open chasm that cleaved the cavern in two. It looked as if the mountain had pulled apart sometime in the past, leaving a rift over 100 feet wide. A wooden bridge in poor repair spanned the gap. Some of the boards were missing and others were badly cracked. The rickety bridge looked as if it wouldn't support their weight. James checked his compass, indicating that their path continued across the chasm. He showed it to Michael. You've got to be kidding, Michael exclaimed. There's no way that's going to hold when we cross. We'll be dropped into whatever's down there. He moved to the edge and looked down, but saw only blackness. We'll die. There's no other way to go, James told him. We can't go back. We have to go forward. Besides, I haven't seen any other passages we could possibly have taken. Michael gave him a defiant look and stood his ground. Okay, scaredy pants, James said mockingly. I'll try it first. If it will hold up for me, it should hold up for you. But what will I do if you fall and die? With a wild look, he shouted. I'll be trapped here. James came to Michael, who was shaking slightly in fear at being left alone. James tried to calm him. Look, I won't ever leave you like that, but someone has to go first and see if it is safe. Michael gave him a look that could only be called pitiful. All right, he said in barely a whisper. James cast a short spell, and the orb floated up and hovered above and a little behind his left shoulder, following him as he moved. Now, the orb, when he first made it, it was solid. But I'm pretty sure that over time it became, like right now, it started to float. So I'm thinking that it's becoming less solid and more just a nimbus of light over time, I think. But yeah. He walked to the bridge and took hold of the single rope handrail on the right. The one on the left had long since fallen off. He placed his left foot gingerly on the first board as far to the edge as possible and eased his weight onto it. Once the board supported his weight, he looked to Michael and said, see, it's going to hold. Then he took his right foot and placed it on the next board. Slowly, he repeated the process, board by board, until he got about mid-span. Suddenly, a board broke in two, causing him to lose his balance as his foot went through. James! Michael screamed. He caught himself on the handrail, preventing himself from falling. Turning slightly, he waved back to Michael to let him know he was fine. Once his nerves had settled and his heart stopped racing, he stepped over the broken board and tested the next before he trusted it with his weight. He was relieved when the board held firm. He continued on as he tested each and every one until he finally made it to the other side. Once safely on the cabin floor, he hauled over to Michael. I made it, made it, his voice echoing throughout the cavern. I'm sending the orb back so you can use it when you cross. Cross. Concentrating, he made the orb float across the chasm to Michael. He had the orb settle over Michael's left shoulder and kept it there. I gotta make one quick change. Okay, now it's your turn. Turn, he hollered. Just keep your feet at the edge of the boards and they will hold your weight better. Michael approached the edge of the bridge and hesitantly set his foot on the first board. When he realized it would hold his weight, he moved his other foot cautiously to the next, making sure to keep his feet as far to the edge of the board as possible, just as James had said. Both hands clutched the handrail in a grip that only fear of imminent death could produce. Slowly, board by board, he made his way across the bridge. When he reached a board that didn't look as if it would hold his weight, he stepped over it and placed his foot on the following board. It was a stretch, but he made it with no problem. When he was about a third of the way across, he placed his foot on a board and heard a loud cracking. Realizing the board was about to break, he took his foot off and paused on the bridge. The next board was broken as well. Only half of it remained. I gotta change that. I have remaining, but it gotta be remained. Now he was faced with the gap of 2 boards. He looked at it wide-eyed, paralyzed with fear. Seeing Michael stop, James called out to him, "Come on, Michael, it's not much farther." I have further, but I gotta change that to farther because it's distance. And then I gotta change the echoes because for some reason I was fascinated with echoes when I wrote this. The next board is cracking, he hollered, and the one after that is broken in 2. I can't make it. Yes, you can. Just calm down, James said, trying to reassure him. Put your feet on the side beneath the handrail and scoot your way down to the next board. Working up his nerve, Michael did what James advised. He placed one of his feet on the side, then the other. Sliding slowly, he made his way past the board that was cracking and then past where the next one was broken in 2. When he was close enough to the next to the following board, hang on. He cautiously set a foot on it and sighed with relief when it held his weight. Once again, he slowly made his way across the bridge, one board at a time. It seemed an agonizingly long time, but eventually made it to the other side. James stretched out his hand and helped him the last few feet. Great job, he said, patting Michael on the back. I knew you could do it. Michael's knees began to shake, and he all but collapsed on the ground before he fell over. I guess now would be a good time for a rest break, James said as he opened a bag, searching for food. When the bag containing the food came up empty, he realized they had given all their food to the families last night. Uh-oh, Michael looked at him. What? We're out of food. He wrapped his arms around his legs, resting his head on his upraised knees and groaned. Great. Now we're going to starve to death. Giving him a look of annoyance, James said, You know, you're awfully negative sometimes. We are not going to starve to death. It takes days for that to happen, and we should be out of here by then, or at least found something to eat. Michael just looked at him for a second and then stretched out on the ground, not saying anything. James allowed him to rest for a few minutes to calm his shaky nerves before getting him up and pressing onward. The cave continued past the chasm for another 100 feet until it narrowed and ended at another passage. This new passage was as narrow as the previous one, and the sides were wet with water that seeped through cracks in the rocks. The floor of the passage had a thin coating of algae which made for a slippery surface. As they followed the passage, the water that seeped through the cracks began to create a small flow that ran along one side of the passage's bottom. It grew until the passage abruptly came to an end where the water flowed over the edge and down toward an unseen bottom. They had come to another subterranean cavern. How big it was and how far from the bottom they were was uncertain. The orb's light failed to illuminate the cavern in its entirety. The drop-off extended almost vertically to an unknown depth. Standing at the opening, they felt a slight breeze blowing from the cavern and into their passage. A narrow flight of steps had been carved out of the rock and descended into the darkness below. Wonder what's down there, James asked. Placing one foot onto the uppermost step, he held the glowing orb out as far as he could. The light didn't illuminate very far, and all they could see were the narrow steps that disappeared into the darkness below. I don't know, Michael replied. I hope we can get out of here soon. I'd like that too, James agreed. Be careful, the steps may be slippery. He took another step and began to descend the steps. He began the descent. There you go. He moved carefully because the water that flowed from the passage cascaded over the first 6 steps before falling off. They didn't descend very far before they noticed the sound of a distant waterfall coming from somewhere below. Soon after that, mist began to float upon the air. The farther they descended, I just love further for some reason. The farther they descended, the louder it became until the sound was practically deafening. They were unable to see where the sound originated as the light from the orb didn't extend quite that far. The steps ended at a stone platform carved out of the wall of the cavern. Upon the stone platform, sitting on a wooden rack was a small boat that looked as if it could seat 4 people comfortably. Mounted on the wall next to the boat were 2 oars resting on several pegs. At the edge of the platform flowed a fast-moving underground river. Hang on. Fast-moving is hyphenated. Underground river. It disappeared through a wide tunnel in the wall. Its ceiling seemed barely high enough to allow adequate clearance for the boat, let alone any passengers. Upstream to the left, they heard the crash of the mighty waterfall as it plummeted down, forming the river somewhere out in the dark. The mist from the waterfall filled the cavern, leaving everything slightly damp. "Looks like we ride from here," James said as he went to inspect the boat. He took a second to figure out the best way to remove it from the wooden rack without wrecking it. Motioning for Michael to help him, he took one end of the boat while Michael took the other, and together they gently lifted it off the rack, setting it slowly upon the platform. Michael leaned close to James so he would be able to be heard over the thunder of the falls and asked, "Think it will float?" "I hope so. I really don't fancy getting in the water and swimming through that tunnel." "What do we do if it sinks?" "Stay afloat and swim as best we can, I guess," James said. "But the wood looks sound, even if it has been down here for a long time." He whacked the side of the boat with his hand, showing Michael that it still had some strength and durability left. Michael looked dubious, but held his tongue. James removed the 2 oars from the wall and placed them inside the boat. Then he grabbed his backpack and placed it inside as well. Michael followed suit and placed his bags inside, and then they slowly worked the boat to the edge. The end of the platform gently sloped downward until it was only a few inches from the top of the flowing water. James eased the boat into the water, all the while maintaining a firm grip to keep it from being pulled away and vanished through the tunnel. He signaled with a jerk of his head for Michael to get in. Michael shouted, "Don't let go," and climbed into the boat, sitting down in the rear of the 2 bench seats. James concentrated on the glowing orb and took a position at the stern. He looked at Michael and hollered, "Now, when I get in, we'll each take an oar and use them to keep us away from the walls and anything else that may pop up in front of us." James waited until Michael gave him a nod, indicating that he understood. He then pushed the boat out and jumped in, yelling, "Stay down and watch your head." The boat moved out from the platform a little as James settled into the front seat and took an oar. Then the current grabbed hold of them and shot them toward the tunnel, picking up speed rapidly. They began going faster and faster until they passed from the cavern and into the tunnel. The ceiling was only about 6 inches from the top of their heads. James placed the oar back into the bottom of the boat as he quickly realized that if he were to use it against the sides of the tunnel at the speed they were going, it would be ripped out of his hands. They both scrunched down as far as they could and held on for dear life. Luckily, the current was keeping them a comfortable distance from the sides of the tunnel, so they had little worry about hitting it. The walls rushed past in a blur, and James heard faint sounds coming from Michael, not sure whether he was crying or laughing. James was scared to death and loving every minute of it. "This sure beats any log ride I've ever been on." Letting out a cry of enjoyment, he gripped the sides tightly and rode on. Rushing headlong into the unknown, the possibility of being killed at any moment was an exhilarating rush for him. They began to hear a change in the sound of the water. It was getting slightly louder, and the tunnel was growing narrower, causing the boat to increase in speed. Fortunately, the tunnel was still sufficiently wide to accommodate the boat. Then all of a sudden, the ceiling of the tunnel opened up, and the river went over a steep 10-foot drop. At the speed they were going, the boat flew out over the waterfall, becoming airborne. A scream of terror came from the back of the boat as they sailed through the air, but James dared not look back to see if Michael was okay, for fear of falling out. Unable to contain his excitement, he let out a scream of his own. Yee-ha-ha-ha! Wham! The boat slammed against the surface of the water, almost spilling them out. James regained his breath after it had been knocked out of him from when they hit the water. The boat slowed as it floated upon the placid water. He looked around and realized that they were on an underground lake. Turning to Michael, James said excitedly, "My God, was that some ride or what?" "Yeah," Michael said miserably, "it was great." "Oh, come on," James explained. "Where I come from, people would pay top dollar to go through that again and again." Michael just looked at him like he was insane and shook his head. His lack of enthusiasm somewhat dampened James's, but he still could feel the thrill of their amazing ride. Grabbing the oars, he turned to face Michael and rowed in the direction the boat was currently headed. To Michael, he said, "Keep a lookout behind me and make sure I don't run into anything." Michael nodded and kept an eye out. After rowing for a few minutes, Michael pointed behind James and said, "There's something in the lake ahead." He glanced over his shoulder and saw a small island poking out of the surface of the water directly in their path. He turned the boat a little to the right, and they sailed around the island, which wasn't very large, and continued on their way. For a brief moment, he had visions of riddles and rings. Well, obviously, that's The Hobbit, right? I don't know if you guys picked up on that, but yeah, riddles and rings. I mean, come on, that can only be The Hobbit, and that's what it was because it's like Gollum in his cave and things. He rode a little longer before Michael yelled, "James, there's light coming from up ahead." Looking over his shoulder, he saw a small patch of light in the distance ahead. He angled the boat toward the light and rowed harder. "Maybe it's the way out." "I hope so," Michael replied. "I want to get out of here." Pulling on the oars with renewed vigor, he rowed toward the patch of light, which continued to grow as they approached. When they drew close, they saw that it was an opening in the cavern wall, which allowed the small stream wide enough to accommodate the boat to flow through. "Should we take it?" James asked, knowing the answer even before he heard it. "Yes!" exclaimed Michael. James grinned and headed for the opening. As they got closer, they saw trees and bushes on the other side. Excited, Michael gave a whoop and hollered as they entered the sunlit world, leaving the underworld behind. The stream flowed steadily and smoothly through a tangle of trees and undergrowth. It was barely deep enough for the boat to keep from scraping the bottom. Twice they became stuck when the boat ran aground. Using the oars, they pushed off the bottom until they were once more in deeper water and the boat was able to float free. It wasn't far until the trees opened up and they realized that they were at the bottom of the gorge. Through the trees ahead, they saw where the stream would soon join the river as it flowed on its way into Matic. Having no more need of the glowing orb, James canceled the spell. As they joined the main river, they looked up and could barely make out the road that they had been on earlier in the day, way up the side of the mountain. Hard to believe that we were way up there just a few hours ago. See, again, I got repetition. Had been earlier in the day, way up the side of the mountain, and then Michael says, hard to believe that we were way up there. See, way up, way up. See, make out the road that they had been on earlier today. High up. It's hard to believe that we were there. I'll just take Michael's way up and just say, hard to believe that we were there just a few hours ago, Michael said. There you go. James looked at the shadows on the mountain and realized that they had been in there far longer than a few hours. "I think that we were in there most of the day," James corrected him. "Judging by the shadows, it's more likely early evening. We left the way stop just after sunup." "I guess that's why I'm so hungry," Michael said, looking at James. "Let's find a spot for a brief camp and we'll see what we can do about that." He maneuvered the boat to the center of the river and let the current take them. He sat back a bit and rested his arms, tired from all the unaccustomed rowing. The river made a turn up ahead, and on the inner side of the bend, there was an open area, as likely a spot as any to make camp. James used the oars to bring them closer. When they drew near, he signaled to Michael. They both leapt from the boat. Leapt from the boat. Change that to leapt. Leapt from the boat. James kept hold of the side until he regained his balance. Michael, on the other hand, didn't fare nearly as well. When he jumped from the boat, his foot slipped on a submerged rock and he fell headlong into the icy cold water. He started splashing and yelled, "James, help me!" James steadied himself and said, "It's not deep, just stand up." Michael's thrashing calmed. With a face red with embarrassment, he stood, realizing he was only in a couple feet of water. Dripping wet and frozen, his clothes were soaked through, and with the sun behind the mountains, there was little to help him get warm. With the bedraggled Michael's help, they got the boat far enough up onto the riverbank so the current would be unable to drag it away. By the time the boat came to rest, Michael was shivering quite badly and his teeth had begun to chatter. Seeing his predicament, James collected driftwood and stacked it together. He used a fire starter spell, igniting the wood. He placed larger pieces on top and soon had a fair-sized fire going. Michael got close, holding his red hands as near the flames as he could stand. Now that Michael's plight was improving, James searched the area until finding a stick approximately 3 feet long. He took his knife and sharpened one end to create a makeshift spear. Once finished, he waded into the river and patiently waited for a fish to swim by. Michael shivered by the fire, its warmth slowly seeping back into his body. Not far off in the river, James stood motionless, his face a study of concentration as he searched the water for movement. Then in one quick moment, he thrust the stick into the water and pulled out a large, wriggling fish impaled upon its end. He brought his catch over to the campsite and used his knife to gut and scale the fish. Then he used the same stick. Used to roast it on the fire. How long are we going to stay here? Michael asked after sitting quietly, listening to the spit and sizzle of juices as they dripped from the fish into the fire. James turned the fish before answering. Probably not until after dark and our clothes are a little drier, he replied. I want to get through the gorge and past any patrols that Cardry may have at the other end of the pass before daybreak. Is it going to be dangerous riding the river in the dark? Probably, but if we keep our wits about us and listen for any changes in the sounds of the river, then we should make it through. Once through, do we head for the City of Light? That's right, answered James. Unless, of course, the Empire's army's in our way. Then we'll just have to see what choices we have, and we'll go from there. He took the fish off the fire and inspected it, deciding that it still needed more time. He put it back over the fire to cook longer. The first town we come to, we'll see about getting a couple horses. We're going to need speed if we want to keep ahead of the Empire's forces. Hopefully, they will not venture into the same area where we are planning to travel. Yeah, let's hope so, agreed Michael. Checking the fish once more, he decided it was fit to eat. Grabbing a couple large leaves from a nearby plant for makeshift plates, he divided the fish and handed Michael his share. While they ate, the sunlight dimmed, the sun sank lower and lower behind the mountains. By the time they finished eating, the first stars appeared in the sky. Michael announced that his clothes were fairly dry. Anxious to leave the pass behind them, James said, "Let's get going and pray we are not seen as we exit the pass." He used the stick and scattered the fire, kicking dirt over it until it was completely out. They pushed the boat to the edge of the river until it floated, and then Michael hopped in. Once seated with the oars at the ready, James gave the boat a final push as he jumped in, and they floated out onto the river. Michael extended the oars and guided them toward the middle of the river. Once the boat was in position, they allowed the current to carry them downriver. The night deepened until only the light from the stars illuminated the river. They kept a vigilant lookout ahead of them, as well as listening for any changes in sound that might indicate rapids or a possible waterfall. Riding an unknown river in the dark made James uneasy, but he felt the risk would be worth it if they could make it through the pass undetected. As fortune would have it, a quarter moon peeked over the tops of the mountains. It gave them just enough light with which to spot rocks jutting out of the surface. After floating for some time, they made their way around a bend, and James realized the river was growing wider. He began to relax, as that usually meant a gentler ride and less chance of coming across any rapids. They drifted along for another hour or so when Michael whispered, "James, up ahead." Snapping awake, he realized he had dozed off for a few minutes. Gotta put "had" in there. Had dozed off for a few minutes. Ahead, they saw lights from several fires on the shore to their right. Silhouettes of many men moved among them. "It must be the checkpoint at the end of the pass," he whispered to Michael. "Let's be quiet so they won't know we're here." Taking the oars, he slowly edged the boat over to the left side of the river, putting as much distance between them and the men on the shore as possible. He positioned them as close to the far shore as he dared. They stayed low in the boat and watched the men on the shore as they floated silently by. Wisps of conversation drifted from the camp, but they were too far away to make out what was being said. There looked to be about 50 men around those fires, and most wore armor. From what was revealed by the flickering campfires, it looked like they had constructed defensive fortifications across the row. "I doubt if that would hold out anybody," Michael whispered as they drifted past the end of the encampment. As they drifted and came to the fortifications. "So do I," he agreed. "Maybe it's just to delay an attacker until they get farther back into the mountains. Though from what we've heard, it's unlikely the Empire will move against Cardry, at least not for a while." They drifted until the fires from the encampment could no longer be seen. The silhouette of the mountains against the night sky showed that they, too, were beginning to drop away, becoming rolling hills. Deciding that they were far enough away, James brought them to the northern side of the river, opposite to the side the encampment had been on. Yep, had been on. I think that sounds better than was. Beaching their boat among a patch of bushes, Michael helped him pull it farther up the shore, away from the water, and hit it. Let's get some sleep before the sun comes up. Then we can see where we are and decide whether to follow the river or continue over land. Michael laid down near the boat beneath a large bush with reddish purple flowers. Using one of the bags for a makeshift pillow, he said, "Sounds good to me." James got comfortable in the shelter of another of the flowering bushes, and soon both were asleep, exhausted from another long day. And that's the end of chapter 22. So they made it through the pass. Now they got to make it through the war zone of Matic toward the City of Light. The first 3 books are pretty much, I've always felt that they were kind of like this one long book cut into 3 different sections, because in the first 3 books he just reacts to everything. He has no time to think about things. He's being pushed along from one adventure to the next, and the first 3 books are that way. And then the 4th book, of course, is when he creates the ranch, and he starts actually doing some magic research and trying to fine-tune what he's doing and learn something new. And yeah, but right now he's just reacting to everything. He's trying to figure things out, and he's just trying to survive, basically. So he's on his way, and he'll get there soon. So I'll get this uploaded, and then I'll talk to you guys probably not tomorrow. Probably be Monday morning. I'll probably will be my next one after this one. Anyway, you have a good weekend, and I'll talk to you later.